So one of the features of our changing world, as Leslie touched on a little bit, is that we can no longer look at pensions issues in isolation. Increasing longevity means that traditional 20th century concept of retirement as a distinct phase of life with a single source of funding is not going to be the reality for many people in the future. And for our first guest, longevity means rather more than that. It means we need to rethink the other two traditional phases of life as well, education and work. As co-author of the 100-Year Life, she says longevity requires innovation and argues for a significant shift in the structure of our lives. And also, I think, a significant shift in the structure of our industry. She was saying to me earlier, she just tweeted that she was about to address an industry dealing with cataclysmic upheaval in the future. I use the word cataclysmic, but maybe in the next one I will. So to begin this year's conference, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage Professor Lynda Gratton. Lynda's going to talk for about 20-25 minutes about her work, and then we'll be joined on stage by Andy Briggs and Otto Torresen to talk about the issues she raised and their implications for our industry and our customers. Lynda, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's such it's a wonderful thing to be speaking to you who sort of hold the pot of how people are going to live long lives. And I wanted just to start by saying that. I know this is your industry, this is your area of interest. I'm not a demographer, by the way. I'm a psychologist. And so my work has really been on the future of work, the future of life. But when we began to look at the implications of longevity, it became really clear to us, and when I say us, me and my co-writer, Andrew Scott, that when people live long, then fundamental changes happen to their life. And boy, are we living long. And this is data actually on, you know, the kids were now 27, how long they're going to live. And as you can see, in most developed countries around the world, our kids are going to live into their hundreds, and indeed many of us are going to as well. And I want to really start with that premise. And the question we asked ourselves was a very simple one. What happens when everyone lives to 100? And you can see that in Japan right now, people are already predicting that. The book that we wrote, The 100-Year Life, has become the best-selling book in Japan. I'm on the Japanese Prime Minister's council on what happens when everyone lives to 100. It's a huge deal in Japan. But of course, Japan is not unique. It's just the first. Every single country in the world, will age as Japan is now aging. Every country, including the African countries, including South America, including Asia. It's just simply that they're the first ones in. And that's why the conversations that we're having now about what does this mean for society are so profoundly important. Well, what does it mean for society? Well, of course, the first thing to remember is that when we think about living to 100, we think about it as maybe being healthy until we're 60 or 70 and then being ill. But you know that not only are we living longer, but mortality rates years are going right down. So when we say 60 is the new 50, it really is. It really is the new 50 in terms of life expectancy after the age of 60, in terms of health, in terms of cognitive ability. And one of the things that we're doing, and Andrew and I are in the process of writing a second book on this, is to tell the world we have got to let go of our ideas about what it is to age. They are wrong, and they've got huge challenges, which I'll describe in a moment. So this is the marvelous idea here, is that long lives can also be healthy lives. Now, what does it mean in terms of the economics of a life? And I'm speaking now to a pension society, so you know this better than I. But part of what we did in the book is that we simply worked out and we used, the book, we used a series of personas, which actually are a really important way of helping people understand the future. This is a persona we built called Jane. And she's born in 1998, she lives 100 years. So we did the financial modeling for her and various other people. So I imagine she's going to be like one of the kids I teach at London Business School. She's probably going to live to 100, they probably are as well. And if she wants to do what she thinks she might want to do, which is to retire at 65 on 50% of her income, what does that mean for her saving rates? Well, of course, the first thing it means is that she will have to save 25% of her salary from the moment she starts working. And I have spoken about this all over the world, and I then ask the audience, as I will ask you, how many people are saving 25% of their income? And of course, I've never yet, actually there are some countries where hands go up. I mean, the Japanese are saving at the moment, but really the US is, the US, when we launched the book in the US, all people talked about was the low savings rate. They have a huge challenge over there. But actually this is really important, and we teach every one of our students about living to 100. That's what we teach them at London Business School. Because obviously, either you start saving more, which nobody seems to want to do, or you work longer. So then the question I ask is, how long do you think, if you live to 100 and save your normal saving rates, how long do you think you'll be working? To which people say, how long do you think you'll be working? Or how long do you think the people whose pensions you're looking after will be working? What do you think the answer is? Pardon? Yeah, 70 or 80. Now, the great thing, of course, of being an academic is I can say that. Your pension minister can't because he has to be re-elected. I don't have to be re-elected, I'm on tenure. So actually, by the way, part of the reason governments, particularly this one in Japan, have been very keen for us to be pushed out to talk about this is they can shoot us. But actually, we're simply telling the truth. And this is what we have to think about. Now, of course, the interesting thing, and you know this, is there's massive differences between countries already and when people are already leaving work. But the more so the obvious point to say is we need to increase the retirement age. But actually that's not going to solve the problem because many people retire already before the retirement age. They stop working before the retirement age. And when you ask them why they do, it's because they can't get a job. They can't get a job over the age of 55. So the book that we're writing at the moment is about that. It says we have got to completely rewire society to realize that actually people will need to work longer and they can work longer, and it's great if they work longer. Do you know that if you carry on working, that reduces your incidence of Alzheimer's? That's a very important thing for people to realize. Not working is not good for you. It's called unemployment. We know how that feels. We've got very clear data about being unemployed. Your social capital and networks go down. So this isn't just happening on its own. It's not just that we're living longer, but we're also living at a time of profound social and technological change. Let me just very quickly rehearse some of the technological change that's happening. First thing is huge development in artificial intelligence and robotics. And of course, the interesting thing about AI and robotics is the stuff that we find easy, like walking up stairs, robots find extremely difficult, which is why you won't see a robot walking up and down these stairs anytime soon. But the stuff that we find hard, like winning a game of chess, machine learning finds incredibly easy. Why is that? Well, and part of the implication of that is this phenomena that economists call the hollowing out of work. And this has been a very important part of the UK labour market story over the last 5 years, and it will continue to be so. What's the story? The story is simply this. People in medium-skilled jobs are losing those jobs to robotics if they're warehousing people, or they're losing them to AI if they're bank tellers. And what you're seeing is, so this is called sort of the loss of those middle jobs, the scooping out of the middle, and what's left in terms of jobs is jobs that require more cognitive skill, more interpersonal skills, more judgment, more decision making, i.e. jobs that you need to be retrained for all of your life, and I want to come back to that, or they're jobs which robots and AI can't do right now, like cleaning this floor, or serving you outside, or looking after your mum who's got Alzheimer's. So a way to think about that is to think about it in terms of routine versus non-routine work. And basically the punchline here is everything that's routine, technology can do. And everything that's non-routine, technology finds hard to do, but is actually learning how to do. So a best example of that would be driverless cars. To be honest with you, when I first heard about the technologies around driverless cars about a decade ago, I wrote at the time, I thought governments would intervene. Because if you take a look at the US job market right now, the job title for which the highest number of medium-skilled men are employed in is truck driving. And that's a very important group if you're an elected member of the US Senate. And they will lose their jobs. So you would expect governments to regulate against this. They won't. They will not regulate against it. They might do it on, you saw the Uber, the sort of trial with Uber. If you noticed how quickly that fizzled out. And you'll see that over and over again, because no government wants to be seen as Luddites. They all want to be seen to be hip and forward-thinking and so on. So this stuff will happen extremely quickly, and it will also affect low-skill work. And you need to know that. This, by the way, is from a marvelous report published by the Royal Society of Arts recently on automation in low-skilled work. It's a fantastic report. In fact, I think Matthew Taylor's here to speak with you this week. And what it shows is that this is a huge part of the UK economy. We think about ourselves as a high-skill, high-income country. We're not. There are many low-skilled jobs in the UK. Those have been historically safe from automation, but that is going to change. The new robotics are moving into low-skill work. There will be something that cleans this room. It's not happened yet. It's expensive. It's not worth it. But it is there. There is a robot that can pick your mum up and take her to the loo when she has Alzheimer's. And by the way, most people would prefer a robot to pick them up and take them to the loo than their own daughter or son. So you will see this happening very quickly. And even to the extent of bank tellers. This is actually Tokyo, and there's me talking to a gorgeous little robot. You've probably seen her, or him, or it, called Pepper. And as you walk in, this little thing is looking at you. You see how it's looking at you and speaking to you. In fact, I spoke to the Danish Pension group last week, and Pepper was there standing next to me. In fact, I tweeted, it hasn't quite got my job, because although it was there, it was pretty useless, to be honest. It couldn't. I said to you, you can hardly do anything. You're just standing there and moving your arms around. But of course, give it time. It's certainly very soon going to be sounding like me. So don't be surprised that the people who you represent are worried about the future. Don't be surprised about that. And they're going to do mad things. They're going to vote for mad people, and they're going to go vote for mad policies because they're anxious about the future. And the interesting thing about anxiety, and you know it very well from the pensions industry, why don't people save? Well, it's the whole elephant and the rider thing, isn't it? That actually we think we're incredibly rational. Economists have told us that for years, but actually the behavioral economists have said, are you kidding? We're totally emotional. That's why we don't save. That's why we eat chocolate cake when we know we shouldn't. We're very emotional. And this emotion, by the way, is also impactful when people think about the future. When people are anxious about the future, they can sort of do their own job pretty well. I mean, they can use the thinking brain to get through, but they're not going to change because they're too worried. They're not going to make long-term decisions. So actually, anxiety is a very difficult thing. And part of my advice to governments and to CEOs is you need to narrate the future. You have got to tell people. Of course, you can't tell them exactly. You can't tell every truck driver in America what job he's going to do. But you need to have a point of view. You need to have a narrative. And your industry needs to have a narrative about the future. What are people doing? Well, you know, the interesting thing, and I speak now as a psychologist, is people change much faster than institutions. We call it institutional lag. It's been identified for more than 100 years. Actually, we as individuals, as a species, are very flexible, very able to change. Look at what happened after the Industrial Revolution. Look what happened after the Second World War. We can adapt, but our institutions tend to lag behind us. And so what you're seeing now is a deep sort of disconnect between how people would like to live and how institutions, corporations, governments are creating a context in which they live. So what are people actually doing? Well, I think they're changing the way they think about their life, and they're rethinking their families. Let me come on to this. Let me look at life first of all. We used to think about life as 3 stages: full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement. That's clearly not going to work. How could one shot at education to the age of 20 work for the rest of your life? In a job market that's changing all the time, where new skills are being developed. The education institutions have been extremely slow on this. I'm working with both the UK government and the Japanese government on this, but frankly, we have to do a great deal more to create lifelong education. Secondly, they don't want to work all the time. I mean, if you honestly think you're going to work till you're 80, how does that feel? You know, your kids are taking gap years, aren't they? At least all of mine seem to be endlessly on gap years. When was the last time any of us took a gap year? But you need to do that. And you need to think about different ways of working. And guess what? People are doing that right now. They're thinking about their life not as 3-stage, but as multi-stage, where they're saying, I'd like to build my own business. By the way, when I teach people about the 100-year life, one of the things I say is, you need to start your own business. Because companies are terrible at getting rid of 55-year-olds. But if you start your own business, you can do it as long as you want. I have my own business. I can be there forever. So, and in fact, if you look right now, there are more businesses being built by the over 50s than there are by the under 25s. They are out there building their own business. They want to change themselves. They want to take a gap year. They want to see the world. They want to transform themselves. So we have to think completely differently about the life course that people are going to have, and also realize that these new stages are going to emerge. Just like being a teenager was a new stage. It took us ages to get, what is it? What is a teenager? Now some other new stages are emerging, like being an explorer. Finding out what you're good at, re-energizing, building your own business, having a portfolio, working through the transitions that you require. But let me finish by saying it's not just about demography, and it's not just about technology. It's also about how we live in communities and in families. And I just want to remind you that the sort of traditional view of what a family is, which is a dad who's working, a mum who's home, and 2 kids, might have been the most frequent family structure in the 1960s, but it's not anymore. And I believe that changes in family structures is going to be one of the most important drivers to how people change their lives. One of the things I've said in Japan, which has the lowest level of women working, I've said to the guys in seminars like this, do you realize you're going to live to 100? You're going to bring up your family till you're 100 on one salary. I mean, how mad is that? No wonder you guys are feeling really annoyed about life. It's just crazy. We've all got to work. And you will see more women working, and you will see not just that, but also a whole huge variety of family structures developing. We're writing about this at the moment. So I asked one of my researchers to say, how many different family structures are there? Well, she came up with 16, but I'm sure there's plenty more. It's just We're shaping our lives differently. And this has profound implications on your industry. And people want different relationships between work and life. We've been banging on forever about work-life balance. We haven't really got very far on that because companies still want people to work very long hours and think that that's what causes high performance. And also women are still doing most of the childcare and domestic work, and that's still continuing. But actually what's really interesting is if you ask a simple question, which is, do you anticipate taking equal childcare? Older men say no. Younger men say possibly, and the youngest men say, I absolutely do. And what we're seeing, and we're following this at the moment, is the rise of the family that's made up of not career plus home carer or career plus job, but career plus career. And when you have these dual careers, you will find they have all sorts of flexible and innovative ways of managing their lives' paths together rather than separately. So I want to finish by saying, the days of how we thought it would be are over. I think it's got huge, positive, optimistic future. But of course, you have to understand there's a great deal more variety, both in how people work, but also in who they are. And we've also, as individuals, got to realize that if there's so much choice, we need to learn how to make good decisions. Thanks very much.
Lynda, thank you very much indeed for that. I wanted to start, if I could, by blending together a couple of questions that have come through on the app. So it does work if you want to jump the queue with your questions. I've got one person asking about the impact of obesity and antibiotics becoming increasingly redundant on attainment of longevity. And another person asking, is it true that Google and Apple are looking at how we can stop the decay of DNA? Clearly something which might promote further advances in longevity. So taking those two things together, I guess the question is really, how confident are you about future trends in longevity, and is the 100-year life a fact?
Well, thank you so much for both those questions. I haven't actually talked about inequality in health because I think that Otto might speak briefly about that. But one of the things to remember, and I feel that inequality, we look at 32 trends actually in my Future of Work consortium. Every single one of them is pushing for greater inequality. There are no trends that we see which actually say everybody's going to be more equal. So we're going to have to think a lot more about how we manage that. But right now in Glasgow, as you probably know, or any city in the UK, the rich and educated live on average 12 years longer than the poor and uneducated. And one of the challenges that your pension minister has when he comes tomorrow is that if governments put up the pension age, they may well be taking away from some part of our society the opportunity ever to retire. And the interesting thing about that is that I, as a person who earns quite a lot of money, can give my money to the poor through taxation, but I can't give my extra years. And I think this is going to be a big problem. So thank you so much for raising that. The second point you made was about Google. It's interesting because I'm not a demographer. I can look at this quite impassionately. And there are three groups arguing about longevity at the moment. One is the obesity group that says actually it's going to go down because people are eating too much and they're not being healthy. There isn't any evidence of that. It will go down for a minority of the population, but not in general. The second says we're beginning to reach, where we possibly could go, and maybe 110 will. And of course, there's more 110-year-olds. And then the third, which is the Google group, say, oh, guess what? We're going to live forever. And if you look at the money that's being spent at the moment on health, the money that's being spent now is on the diseases of the old. The reason we got to the longevity we've got now is that we solved the diseases of children and we solved the diseases of the middle age. We won't die of a heart attack, but your dads and my dad certainly did. Now the money is being spent on our diseases, which are DNA, Alzheimer's, and so on. So we have made no prediction about that. But certainly, we think, and I've spoken to the Treasury about this, we think that the figures that are being given at the moment underestimate life expectancy because they assume that a child born now or a 50-year-old will live the same as somebody who was born, who was 50 some years back. And yet, actually, every year, life expectancy increases. And so I think you, as an industry, need to take a look at how you measure life expectancy.
It's a really interesting point you make about inequality there, Lynda. I think the research we published on longevity earlier this year showed that the convergence we'd been seeing between different income groups appears to have paused in the last 5 or so years. So very interesting to think through the implications of that. Now for our next session, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you're all going to have a little bit more time to ask questions of Lynda and our panel. The bad news is Andy Briggs is unavoidably delayed on what appears to be the 100-year train journey up from London.
I know about that. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, Andy almost certainly isn't going to make it in time for this session. In further good news, however, though, we do still have Otto Torresson, Chair of Nest. Otto, please do come up and join us.